Hey kids, before we get started, just wanted to tell you where you can find us. You can see us coming up this weekend. Wait, you're saying there's a show? No, I'm not saying there's a show. I'm saying drag your ass down to Sandy Point State Park and support your favorite friends at Art Fight as we do the Polar Bear Plunge for the second year in a row. There's still time to support us. There are going to be donations taking all the way up through Saturday morning, I believe, of the plunge. So superartfight.com for all the details on that. Support your favorite art fighter. And if you suddenly have the nerve and you want to come join the team, go ahead and sign up. Hit us up on social media. Join up with us. We'll do photos. We'll hang out. We'll get food afterward. It'll be a total fun thing. And come be part of the Art Fight crew. Where else you can find us in an actual show, though, is coming up between the weekend of March 30th and April 1st. We are going to be at Awesome Con in Washington, D.C. I believe we're going to be doing 2 shows. I don't know if we've announced it yet, so if not, sorry, Marty, tough shit. All right, so as he chuckles into it, we are going to do this properly. So, sir, if you would. That's right, kids. Once again, time for So That's Cool, the Super Art Fight podcast. I am your host, the honorable referee, Brandon Chalmers. And with me today,
I never remember past that.
You're right, is the smartest man in Art Fight, at least when it comes to everything other than remembering the Art Fight theme song. He is Dr. Dan Malahome.
Hello, hello. How are you doing?
Sir, I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Doing good. Can't complain.
Right on. So, just right out of the gate, also, I want to apologize if anybody complains about the audio quality of these. Due to schedules and stuff like that with moving and just life, I've had to do these a little differently, so we've been having to stream these live. Usually we do them in person, so the audio quality is a lot better. I'm going to try and schedule more in-person ones, and hopefully the audio quality will be a little better. But if it sucks, I'm sorry. Feel free to give me a hard time on social media. All right. So with that out of the way, and my apologies of potential audio issue, Dan Malahome, you are arguably, and maybe not so much arguably, the smartest man I know. And because of that, every time I'm in your presence, I instantly feel smarter because you raise the bar of conversation. I sit down with Michael Bracco, I talk about Bruce Willis movies. I sit down with you last time, I talked about astrophysics. So with that said, where are we going today?
We're going with my actual focus in my master's and my academic work, which is sociology.
Okay. You know, this feels absolutely like something we can tackle in an hour. That's
yeah.
Just no problem.
We can do the 101, you know.
Okay. All right. So I guess then let's do that real fast so that everyone kind of understands where we're talking about. Can you give like the snapshot elevator pitch of definition of sociology?
Sociology is essentially just the study of social systems, social structures, and how the individual is affected by it and how society is created by it. It often overlaps with anthropology, which is the study of human culture. But sociology looks more at the mechanics and how individuals are affected by the society at large.
Okay, so we're not actually talking about culture then, per se.
It overlaps, but
okay.
Culture focuses more on, like, you usually study a specific culture, whereas sociology will look at mechanics and how that mechanics will be enacted or not enacted in different cultures.
What do you mean by mechanics?
I mean,
like outside factors, like inventions, like what are we talking about?
Structures, inequality, racism, prejudice.
Okay, I got you. Okay, so we're talking about large social constructs as opposed to like things between, you know, the invention of the wheel, the plague, and racism, and then the difference in between studying strictly Roman culture, Eastern European culture, and America in the South in, you know, between 40 and 71 or something like that.
Exactly. So like anthropology would focus on those individual tenets, whereas sociology would say something like colonialism. How did colonialism affect cultures all across the world, kind of thing?
I'd argue that's a pretty serious one to tackle.
Oh, that's a very big one.
Yeah, like this is kind of apt because I don't know if you're aware or have listened to it. I've been binging the hell out of this other podcast called The Dollop, and the whole idea of it is 2 guys sit down, one of them covers an event or person in American history and explains it to another person who's never heard it before, and they basically start to realize how much of a just trash pile America is and has been for fucking ever.
Yeah, there's definitely some the golden age of America, or kind of the shining beacon that it's often portrayed at, is definitely a very specific point of view.
Yeah, like breaking down like silly things like vampirism and vampires, and the common exception up until, what was it, like almost the turn of the century, like in 1910 they were still dealing with vampire bullshit.
Yeah.
Right. And just things, ridiculous shit like that. So I have had just an absolute ton of American history from across the board thrown at me. But what the hell made you decide sociology over all things? Like, why not anthropology instead? Because I feel like anthropology may actually be more interesting, at the risk of insulting you.
Anthropology is a very specific thing. It's, to me, so I often equate sociology and anthropology, which at my university is actually one department. They're kind of two sides of one coin, whereas the same way I also associate psychology and sociology, whereas psychology looks at the micro, it looks at individuals, and it kind of often looks at outliers. Why is this person, you have the DSM, so you have bipolar manic depressive disorder, you have dissociative disorder, you have psychotic individuals. So you have like these very specific individuals, and you look at the outliers. The macro version of that is sociology, where you look at the general trends. So the one thing about sociology is you can never say absolutes, because you're speaking about entire populations of people. But for entire populations, you can make usually generalized statements, whether it's gathering data, whether it's about their culture or whatever. But you can essentially look at whole populations of people and see how they operate, and kind of explain the processes for why those people act the way they do versus another culture. So whereas anthropology, you're focused on one culture and you can talk about all the ins and outs of it, sociology allows you to compare and contrast two different cultures, or like large groups of individuals, as opposed to psychology tends to focus on individual cases or the outlier cases.
Okay, but aren't they kind of almost the same? Like in the case of a cult of personality characters, such as like an Adolf Hitler or something, where the ideology of one person drives an entire culture to then make a decision that then impacts multiple cultures across the globe. You could argue that without that one person, yeah, there's there's a lot of nationalism going on that happens, but it doesn't necessarily start heading off in a direction until one person is the spearhead of that.
Well, and that's sociology is actually a very young social science. It emerged in the mid 19th century, so like late 1800s. And before that you had psychology. Psychology is a very old feature, and you had anthropology kind of grew out of historians. So you kind of study history, you study cultures, and anthropology.
Right, no, that makes sense, because it feels like most history classes that you take through school are basically anthropology courses.
Right. So how sociology emerged is the original belief was that psychology, that an individual is entirely I don't say self-made, but not in that sense, whereas their personality is entirely manifested by their own individual being. Where sociologists started to come around and say, no, the structure of society, where you are, geographically, where you are culturally, where you are financially, forms your personality as well. So the society at large has an impact on you. And exactly as you were saying, it goes both ways. The individual affects society, and society affects the individual. Okay,
right on. So literally the old hip hop lyric, "I'm a product of my environment," is really like true to form in the case of sociology, because that is essentially the structure of it.
Yep.
Okay.
And that's why you have a lot of focus on minorities. Hip hop actually has a lot of focus on in sociology, because of it is not written by the majority group, those in power, those in dominance. It's written from a different perspective. So it's entirely constructed by the overarching power from a perspective of people not in that position of power.
Okay. So I'm just trying to like wrap my head around some of the argument that would be had on the other side of this, because, and I assume that the argument that always would probably pop up to debate this would be, you would, I assume, go with, these are individual outliers. So you can say, yeah, I'm a product of my environment, and that, given a financial situation, a culture, an area, a location, what have you, a large majority of people end up making about this amount, doing this sort of thing, following through this much, have these social constraints, and agree in this kind of similar fashion. and you argue, well, what about this person who made it out and this person who made it out? And I assume the argument is then they're anomalies, they're outliers in the data, as opposed to the exception that kind of breaks the rule.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. Wow. All right. Apparently I'm way easier to understand this than I thought.
I mean, sociology is a very, when you start to talk about the individual aspects of it and the mechanics, they make sense. Like, they're very logical, but the whole thing is like looking at these factors and kind of seeing, just seeing them, different things. Like, one of the ones my students I talk about, there's deliberate and there's unintentional socializing, not socialism,
okay.
socializing.
Okay. Can you give me examples of what the hell you're talking about?
So if somebody sneezes, the majority of people will say either bless you or gesundheit.
Okay.
That's a socialized response. That's a very, maybe you've been told by your parents or whatever. So that's more direct socialization. Or maybe you've just kind of been around people and you realize, oh, someone sneezes, I say bless you.
Right. Okay.
It's not a deliberate taught function, but it's a thing of how society, like, it's good manners.
Okay.
But if you go to Eastern Asian country, you sneeze, nobody blinks an eye. Like, it's a very structural social thing where manners involve saying bless you to someone who sneezes simply because that's what you're supposed to do. That's what society says you're supposed to do versus.
Okay.
So that's where you kind of go into the anthropological aspect of it too, where cultures shape how we act. That's like one of the more kind of obvious examples I think of. A teacher standing in front of a room, or me talking to you now as a presumed position of authority, me telling you these things, you're just saying, okay, that's what they are. So positions of authority, we are socialized to believe that individuals in positions of authority know what they're talking about. Like, that's a socialization. That's what happens. That's a structure of society.
Okay. So I'm confused by that statement though, because isn't that kind of the thing that binds us together? But the tone that you had kind of makes it sound like that's true, but that could also be complete horseshit.
I'm not making any judgment values on the morality or the implications or the benefits of social structures. Okay. I'm simply commenting on their existence.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. All right. So
have you ever heard of the game Two Truths and a Lie?
No.
So it's a game, you'll use it as an icebreaker sometimes in like corporate environments or whatever, or do it as just like a camp. So it's two truths and a lie. So the whole goal is that you provide 3 statements, and then you have the people that you're interacting with, you're doing an icebreaker with, determine which of your 3 statements is a lie. So usually you say it about yourself or just in general. So it's kind of it's a way to learn about you, but also figure out what's your personality type.
I got you. Okay.
So what I often do with my class is, or I don't do it often because once I've done it, it blows up the spot. But I'll say, hey, okay, we're gonna play the game Two Truths and a Lie. I'm gonna put 3 statements on the board. You tell me which ones are the truths, which ones are the lie. Okay. So I will put like John F. Kennedy was the youngest U.S. president. The Great Wall of China could be seen from space, and Thomas Edison invented the light bulb. So then we have this kind of discussion as which of those are the truths, which of those are the lie.
Right.
All 3 of those are lies. But based on pop culture and based on the assumption that if I'm presenting this exercise to my students,
right,
they're taking it at face value that, well, he's saying 2 of them are truths and 1 of them's a lie, so I need to figure out which one's a lie. It's like, no, it's just you are socialized to think, okay, the individual in front of the room is a person of authority, so I'm going to trust what they say.
Right, that makes sense.
And then even further in U.S. culture, it's even more compounded where, people in positions of authority, we're not supposed to question them. So not to get political, but the president of the United States, you say something and it's like...
No, I mean, I get that, but you can even use that in a microcosm of talking to a police officer.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah, it's just like we are trained and socialized to... And it's necessary in some situations. We have these structures in societies. We have these hierarchies of, yes, like in situations where things are going wrong, I will tend to trust a police officer because they've been trained, presumably, in those situations.
Right.
So it's not unmerited, but it is also a socialized behavior that is taught to us by society as we're growing up.
Okay, so what I'm gathering here is that your bullshit meter is real good.
I tend to not take things at face value.
Okay.
I'm big on fact checking. And when I get some right information, I will often gladly share it because I'm like, hey, this pans out. This is cool. But other times I'm like, So Facebook, I look at Facebook, and half the time I'm like rolling my eyes. I'm like,
Right?
This does not make any sense.
Okay. So does this completely ruin you for the world?
It might ruin me for my wife sometimes because I'm like, well, she's not as bad as other individuals, but I'm like pulling up Snopes, or I'm like, well, actually, I'm. I never do it as a self-raising situation or a chance to be like, oh, look how smart I am. But I try to proliferate as much truth in the world as I can, or at least a critical thought process, and try to make people analyze the world more.
Okay, right on. Much as I kind of stated in the beginning is, I feel smarter being around you just in general because you force the conversation to be less bullshit. Now, you will go jumping down. You love sports. You'll joke around with me about explosions and stupid bullshit all the time.
Yeah.
So, like, it's that nice thing of every so often, and I know you don't actually dumb it down, but it's nice that I never feel like I'm the dumb guy in the room around you.
Well, and that's why I try to approach it like it's from a understanding the social mechanics, and like I said, I never judge the merits of any of these factors, any of these mechanics, because like there's no point in me doing that because they still exist. I just want to be aware of them. But I have so many things that I find wrong with the NFL, and it drives me crazy. The things they do. Yes. But I also can't deny that I get enjoyment of watching games. Like I do enjoy watching football. So I guess you could say I'm hypocritical for that, but at the same time, I'm just about making people aware of these things, and that way they can approach it with as critical of an eye as they can. I'm not telling them how to act. I'm not telling them what to do, but I want to present as much information as possible and encourage a critical eye so people analyze these things and know what's going on when they're looking at them.
Okay, so you bring up an interesting thing, and I'm curious your perspective on it. In an event such as like the NFL, mm-hmm. Do you have a personal issue with knowing that you're being hypocritical?
No, because of it depends. The way I look at it is from a mechanical point of view of me supporting the NFL by watching it. Like I'm supporting it. I'm right. Giving them viewership. And like clearly they're making money off of my watching it. But at the same time, too, I'm well aware of their issues, and I don't shy away. I don't try to gloss over or ignore any of the issues. If I see articles about the CTE injuries that players often have, the abusive nature of a lot of their players, rape allegations, like I share them, I talk about them, I call for reform from within the NFL. There's a new movement going on between players and coaches where they're going to try to address injustice within and outside of the NFL, which I think is fantastic, and I promote that. I think Roger Goodell needs to go. So I try to basically work from a position of, I don't think of it as hypocrisy, because I look at a position of change from, not from within, because obviously I'm not in the NFL, but
right,
but not ignoring it, as opposed to, I'm saying address the changes, because if I'm not aware of it and I just ignore it, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to do the NFL at all, then I'm just ignoring the issues.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, I've always had a different feeling of it. When everything went down way back with Ray Rice, and I just full stop. I just went, I'm done.
Oh, and totally. And they'll give somebody suspension for a full season because he was caught with marijuana, and Ray Rice gets 2 weeks or whatever.
Right. But I had always kind of viewed it in the same way that I had treated Chick-fil-A for forever, where it was like, my dollar is the only way that I can make an actual impact with them. Sharing things on social media, so on and so forth. Being a longstanding wrestling fan, I'm more than aware. Publicly bitching and complaining, even directly at the company, changes nothing.
Yeah.
It doesn't move the needle at all. So I had to kind of learn that it was like the only way that I affect their bottom line is by either supporting certain things or not supporting other certain things. And my dollar is the only vote that matters to them.
See, my counter argument to that is, especially whether it's Chick-fil-A or whether it's NFL, if you're not promoting those causes, yes, you're hurting them in the bottom line, but okay, let's say you bought Chick-fil-A once a week for the entire year.
Right.
That's less than $500?
Yeah.
You're assuming $10 a meal and 52 weeks in a year.
Right.
So if you are not, not saying that, I mean, I don't really shop at Chick-fil-A either I'm assuming similar reasons, but if you're not amplifying the story, $520 a year out of their millions of dollars, is insignificant. Whereas if you are telling people about the reasons for doing so,
right,
that multiplies.
Right. No, I mean, I understand that there has to be both, but I think that's kind of my thought with your aspect and your perspective of sociology and understanding impact on culture. It's the curiosity of like, does it have to be, can it be one? Can it be the other? Does it have to be both? Like, I'm just trying to basically figure out where's the line between, am I being righteous? Am I doing the right thing? Or when am I being an annoying douchebag on the internet where I'm like, you know what? I'm not supporting them and I'm not doing the thing and I'm not spending any money and you have to listen to my diatribe. And like, eventually I know people will shut down, and I can't seem to figure out where's that happy medium where, and it might just be culture at this point, because I don't even know if it's sociology that causes it, or if it's anthropology or whatever you want to call it, that basically no one's interested in having an open discussion about anything anymore. Either you agree with me or you can go fuck yourself, and there's no middle ground.
Well, and that's what's emerging, and that's sociology is having a heyday in the past few years with, not even the past year, with things like fake news, and both, you know, the president himself and just the kind of lack of scientific literacy. You know, they see these headlines, they see these studies, and so that's why I try to approach everything, like I said before, present all the evidence, and like I don't make judgments. I don't give them. I usually will say my perspective. I will say my opinion. I will present the evidence to say this is why I think this. I use, you know, you go back to like conflict management, where it's like use I terms, talk about how, you know, you don't accuse the other people. So I try to work. I mean, whether it's from a sociological perspective or just as an educator, it's like my goal is to make you think critically. And I will present all the evidence that I can present to you. I will present data. I will present studies. I will present research. And I can't force you to change your mind, but if I'm yelling at you, like you said, you know, if I'm sitting there yelling at you to change your mind, you're not going to change your mind.
Right. Yeah. I think that's really like the thing is, I used to live by the rule of you'll never win an argument on the internet. And I get that. And the only time you ever respond to somebody on the internet, unless you personally know them and interact with them, there's no ground to be gained, and all you're doing is picking a fight. I get that. And now I don't understand what I'm supposed to do, because I have these in-person conversations with people and I get the same response I used to get on the internet. And now I don't understand what I'm supposed to do. And I don't know if there's been a point in history from your experience and understanding that's been anywhere near this. Like, I understand basic economics. I get the idea of the old, you know, the old straight graph where it was like, you know, the economy's a line and, you know, the economy rides up and down, and, you know, the peak is Reaganomics and the bottom is the Great Depression or the recession. And, you know, for decades it was, oh, okay, well, what drags us out of a poor economy? War. We'll pick a fight. We'll create a bunch of jobs. We do a bunch of things. Cool. Raise the economy up. And then things kind of go back and forth. And I understood it. I got it. I figured it out because there were real, you know, things that caused it to go one way or the other. I don't understand culture enough to understand what makes a society change from being, you know, why were the Roaring 20s roaring, but yet the 50s buttoned down as fuck? Like, I don't know what happens to make us that way. Like, I don't understand what's going to be coming down the pipe to reset everything and have everyone kind of force themselves to go out and be social again and understand each other and actually, you know, like.
I think the biggest thing that have championed for that would kind of start to shift things that way is accountability online, where we don't have avatars, we don't have usernames. It's never going to happen, but like Facebook's the closest to it, but like you can make your Facebook personal. But like Twitter, if you can only have your Twitter be your full name, or YouTube, you know, your name, Reddit, any of those internet forms where you can only be yourself, because essentially what's happening is anonymity. People can hide behind their avatars and their screen names, and they can essentially spout these things that are within them. So like, that's the thing, is that the things that are being said, they're not new. People think that like, oh, I mean, whether it's Obama, whether it's Civil Rights Act, like, oh, racism's gone. Racism is nowhere near gone, and racism is not going anywhere. It's just been hiding. And that's basically what has been allowed to happen, is with anonymity of the internet, it's come out. And then as people feel empowered because, oh, there's other people who are thinking the same thing as I, then, you know, they become more vocal. that's the double-edged sword of the internet, is that you have a lot of LGBTQ individuals, you have just anybody of minority groups, whether it's religiously, sexual orientation, gender identity, have been able to find other people no matter where they live. So you could be in the middle of bumfuck Kansas and, you know, feel like you are by yourself, but then you go on the internet and you find your community. But it also works the other side. You could be alt-right, you could be white supremacist, you could be a Nazi, and you will find your people. So until there's accountability, but even then, I'm not sure. Although with Charlottesville, we saw more and more as these people were getting called out, you saw them sort of backing off.
Right, but
you also have vigilantism where they identify the wrong people. So then you start having people who are not like, oh, they happen to look like that person, and then they kind of get caught into it.
Yeah, I mean, you saw that in the Boston bombing, you know, where they you know, the mob mentality takes over, and I don't know if it's encouraging that and then figuring out how to, like, once it's common, rein it in a little bit. But like, I don't know. Like, I feel like we've lost a step as far as, I don't even know how to word it. Like, we've gotten out of fucking control.
I think a lot of it, though, especially like having conversations in class and with students at school, it's mostly political. You have this dragging of the political center further and further to the right. You have this empowering, like, you have these, they're still minority groups. Because if you look at any kind of polls, America tends to be more progressive now than they were 20 years ago.
Well, yeah.
So it is much more inundated with these hateful voices, but it's also still the louder minority. Like the Westboro Baptist Church was a tiny conglomeration who are very well known, but they're like less than 100 people, and they just gather to protest, you know, military funerals and this and that. So I totally get where you're coming from, because there's times where I feel like, what is this world coming to?
Yeah, it's not even like, and that's the thing. That's what I worry about, is making open statements like that. These, you know, the huge casting statements, the millennials are ruining blah blah blah. Like, I can't fucking do that anymore, because I worry that casting those, you know, painting with those broad brushes like that, you start to lose your audience. And I don't know if that's the best way to do it, if it's like try and get everyone to associate and drag them along, but then you alienate part of everyone else. And like, I can't figure out the happy medium between, like, they can go fuck themselves because they're fucking crazy, and I'm trying to speak to people in a reasonable manner and trying to maybe get a couple people who might disagree with me on, you know, 2 of the 10 things I said, and instead of them telling me to go F myself, they're like, yeah, okay, let's have a conversation about those 2 things, and at least maybe you're not terrible.
Right. I mean, that's what I like about sociology. So not that they can't be similar styles, but anthropology tends to be more qualitative analysis. So qualitative as in quality. So it's usually because you're studying a culture, you will do almost like embedded studying, where like you'll live in that culture. Like that's the kind of the epitome of anthropology. Is you go and you live in that culture, you learn the language, you do the habits, so you can study the culture from inside, so you truly understand it. That tends to be qualitative research, where it's I don't want to say subjective, but it's you use words, you describe it, you kind of have a much more what's the word I'm looking for? I don't want to say subjective because it sounds not as infallible, but it's a subjective analysis. You use qualitative terms, whereas a lot of sociology, although sociology doesn't use qualitative, uses quantitative. It uses quantities, it uses numbers, it uses census data, it does surveys. It's much more data driven. So you talk about these large sweeping generalizations, you can use numbers. You can say this percent of the population, individuals with these characteristics tend to emerge, like you were saying earlier, into these demographics, into these socioeconomic status. So you can speak with, it's not the utmost precision, but you can speak in more actual concrete terms. Like not saying, oh, all people of this group. You could say 75% of this group, yada, yada, yada.
Right, okay, but it feels like both of them are reactive science, though. You're only able to really rip apart what hasn't happened. There's no way, like, no one that I know of, at least in my limited scale, is taking this data and then projecting it and saying, well, these trends show that in the next 5 years, this is going to be the thing, this is going to be the thing. Because as a scientist, I assume you're just not comfortable making those kind of just assumptions, right?
You can make predictions about groups, but yeah, you can make predictions about the society at large. But what you can use it to is show concrete evidence for the state of affairs and then say why it needs to change. And then you can often compare different demographics or different things regionally. You can say, oh, this educational system in this state produces this many graduates versus it's a different system in this state. So you could say, based on the evidence where there's a 95% graduation rate because of these characteristics, let's try to implement them in this country or this jurisdiction.
So really, so that I'm understanding it, essentially it feels like sociology is taking statistics and applying it to real life.
Yes.
Okay.
There's 3 steps usually. There's descriptive, which is just literally saying, 5% of the U.S. population is Asian. It's just a descriptive statistic. You're gathering the data and you're kind of doing the math, and it's very simple. The second step is explanation, and it's like, okay, why are there fewer women CEOs than men CEOs? Which that's more of an obvious one, but you want to look at the mechanic and say concretely, like, why are there fewer women than men in positions of power? And then the third step is policy, suggesting based on data from other demographics or areas of study, how can we change policy to implement those changes? Because the whole overall, I don't want to say the goal, because the whole point of sociology is supposed to be kind of describing the state of affairs. But typically for sociologists, the goal is equity, like creating an equal opportunity playing field for all demographics, or at least kind of saying why there's inequality between different demographics.
Okay, so all right. This makes complete sense. I understand how it works and everything at this point now, but I think I'm curious why it isn't a more everyday sort of understanding and something that is like, hey, for the lack of a better way to put it, and let's just assume the office rather than the person, the president should have a sociologist, and what that person does is it takes a look at this stuff and it goes, okay, here are our top 10 problems that we see going on comparative to economics and yada, yada, yada. Here's what we need to tackle. Otherwise, bad shit's going to happen. And then you basically start to trade off how do we tackle this punch list along with all of the other social issues that are happening live and in real time, and then try and knock these things off. And I almost wonder, like, and we covered it the last time when we talked about astrophysics, where, astrophysics has a Neil deGrasse Tyson. They have a face. They've got some. Who's the sexy sociologist? Like,
nobody.
Even anthropology had the TV show Bones. So we had some sort of like.
Well, and it's anthropology. I mean, usually you study human anthropology, but you also have anthropology of animals. So
like Jane.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So like you have other aspects of it where, because it's still a focus, because you can kind of, with anthropology, you can talk about a specific culture, specific subculture, but people don't often, a lot of times what sociology reveals is kind of the inequality, and there's a thing called the middle class myth in the United States where a majority of the Americans think that they're middle class, which statistically doesn't make sense. Just how most people tend to think they're something smarter than average.
Okay.
But the majority of people can't be smarter than average because, again, average is 50%. So
right, no, I get that. Okay, so wait a second. So then I'm understanding this, and I'm gonna ask a question here. What exactly is middle class?
So it depends. It depends on which structure. So there's the study that I usually kind of, or the format that I usually kind of discuss in class is the 6-tiered structure. So there's upper class, which is also known as the capitalist class, and basically it's individuals who make all their money off of stocks, interests. They don't really work. They don't tend to work.
Okay.
You have upper middle class, which is people who usually have PhDs and MDs and JDs.
Wait a second, hang on, because I feel like you're differentiating it based not on economics.
It isn't. Well, so typically you say socioeconomic status. You have a lot of factors. Usually it's education. Usually it's income. Not usually, but sometimes demographics can play into it. But so like typically when you're looking at class structure, you look at income. So the highest class, the capital class, they make a majority of their income from interests and capital stocks and bonds and things like that.
Right. We're talking about the ones, what Bernie Sanders yelled about.
Yep.
Okay.
Upper middle class is individuals who have the higher degrees, so doctors, lawyers,
okay,
like that.
Gotcha.
Who still make a large amount of their income off of a salaried position.
Okay.
Middle class tend to be people just below them, so white collar workers, management, supervisors, things like that. They tend to usually have a degree of some sort. Below them is working class, which may or may not have a degree. It's more and more common nowadays, but they're essentially still living paycheck to paycheck. They may or may not own a home, but they're kind of on that threshold, but they're technically considered below middle class traditionally. And then you have the working poor, which is people who are just scraping by, who are working, but are considered near or below the poverty line set by the federal government. And then below that is the underclass or the poor.
Okay.
So majority of people tend to think themselves as middle class, and there's a large proportion of people who are middle class, but there's also a large proportion that are working class. And then the other side of it, though, it also goes the other way. You have people who are upper middle class who consider themselves middle class. So like there's like doctors and lawyers who are like, oh yeah, I'm middle class. And it's like,
no,
not really. Yeah.
Right.
Because they're like, oh, well, I'm not making millions of dollars. It's like you're still, the median household income in the United States is $55,000. So if you as an individual are making six figures, you're making more than the median household income in the United States.
Right.
So like if you're a doctor making 100 G's, you're well above a large proportion of the population.
Right. That makes sense.
But they still tend, like, and it was the whole thing with Mitt Romney, where he was like, oh yeah, middle class, blah, blah. And like economically speaking, you could say up to $250,000, you are maybe still middle class because you might, but you're also living at a higher means. You're buying houses that cost a lot more, this and that. So while you might not have a lot of wealth, because that's the whole thing to consider too, is the difference between income and wealth. So while the 1% are making their income off of interest and stocks and bonds, they have money already. So like it's a difference versus wealth. Whereas typically the most wealth that anybody in the middle class or even the upper middle class has is their home. That's like the largest, liquidatable value that you have is a mortgage.
Right.
And then the working class and below sometimes don't even have that. They might have a car. So there's a difference between income and the difference between wealth.
Okay. So realistically then, if nobody fucking knows what they really are, and everyone tries to put themselves in a higher class than what they really are because they want to feel better about where they are socially.
Well, they don't even always put themselves in a higher class. Like I said, the upper middle class consider themselves middle class. They just have no perception of how other people live. Because typically those people who maybe they've gone to med school, like again, there's always gonna be exceptions, but a lot of those people who can afford to go to college, afford to go to med school, afford that education, they come from an already affluent family. Like there's individuals who get scholarships. So they've never had to live paycheck to paycheck. They never had to have a service sector job. They've never had to struggle to pay rent per month. So they don't have a concept of that. So they're like, oh, well, I'm still living paycheck to paycheck because I'm living in a $600,000 house.
Right.
Like, I'm middle class. It's like, but you're not, because you just have no sense of concept.
Okay.
There's a sociologist, C. Wright Mills, who was famous in the 1950s. He wrote one about the power elite, which describes the structure of society and how it gets formed by the power elite, essentially. And he also has something called the sociological imagination, which in a nutshell is empathy. And it's basically removing yourself and seeing how these mechanisms of society influence an individual from a different origin than your own. Just kind of putting yourself in somebody else's shoes. The problem is, we say that, we talk about that, but most people have a really difficult time actually imagining what it's like for a single mother, a minority, an immigrant, these people because they've never had that experience.
No, absolutely. I mean, I think without doing what an anthropologist would actually do and living that life for a month, you know what I mean? Basically learning to go without, physically having to go without, doing everything that they do, you lose perspective.
Yep. And that's what a big goal of sociology is just showing the data. Again, not making judgments on whether it's a right system or a wrong system or how the society is structured, but it's just saying, this is the reality. This is the numbers of what percentage has, income higher than $1 million, what percentage has an income less than $25,000. The poverty line is at 24,000 right now, I think. So like, you know, and there's a large proportion of people living below the poverty line, which other people could never imagine because they've never been there.
Right. But like, that's crazy though, because it seems like, am I mistaken? Isn't the poverty line moving up and the median income staying the same?
The poverty line has increased a little bit over the past 30 years, essentially since Reagan. The median is increasing a little bit, but it's also being adjusted for inflation. So you're not wrong. Yeah. So they're calling it the middle class squeeze. So it used to be middle class, like you had lots of blue collar jobs. Think of like the United States in the mid 20th century. You had a lot of industry. Baltimore had its steel workers. Baltimore was almost 1 million people in 1970. But then as industry starts to leave, you have what people are calling the third technological revolution, which is automation and it's computers essentially.
Right.
You have people in the upper echelon of the middle class that are able to get the opportunities to be trained for, you know, computer engineering, mechanical engineering, these higher technical jobs. But you also have these people in the middle class or working class who their jobs are being automated. You know, you might have been a very well-off either coal mine worker or somebody working at, you know, Ford in Detroit or whatever.
Right.
Your job's been automated. So now you don't have training in any other job besides that. So you're now being pushed down. So the middle class itself is shrinking. You often hear that people talk about the middle class shrinking because those that have the opportunities have moved up, but there's also those who don't have the opportunities for moving down. So the middle class numbers are actually shrinking and more people are being shifted down into the working class or potentially up if they were able to get the opportunities for better education.
Right. That makes sense. God, that's depressing.
Very depressing stuff. But, you know, it's like they talk about the first step to fixing a problem is admitting there's a problem. So being aware of these inequalities and being aware of how some people are living versus others is the first step to realizing, okay, we need to start taking steps to correcting these problems.
Okay, so we're getting near the end of this one. So I want to ask, what is probably, you would say, the worst sociological incident that made the most effect? White people hitting America?
Not necessarily. Well, so to give you a quick contrast. So like, yes, white people, I guess, but
just like between going for just the impact from leaving like England, like leave England to America, fucks up all of the Native Americans, moves west, takes out all the Mexicans, fights, destroys everything, owns everything, argues with everyone, brings over an entire culture, puts them in slavery, has the nerve to yell at them when they can't pick themselves back up, and then still has the nerve to act like they're oppressed.
So, well, that was the thing. So you talked on slavery, and that's something I want to touch on is it's been a very northern Western culture thing to address slavery and create that racial divide that we have. Because while slavery has existed for 400 plus years, or, you know, it's still exists to this day, you know, the 1600s when we started bringing individuals out of Africa to the Americas. North America got slaves and so did South America. The Portuguese, the Spaniards, the French who were in South America, they also had slaves.
Yeah.
But their approach was different. So while they still had slaves, you had more opportunities for individuals. Like they were allowed to buy themselves out of slavery. If they were able to get their freedom, they were treated as less, they were not treated as less than human. So you have a cultural difference. And as that structure shifted, you now have a lot of individuals in South America. You have these tendencies where race, like in Brazil, you often see fair-skinned and dark-skinned Brazilians. They don't really consider them like separate races or anything like that because they've essentially never saw them that way. Whereas in the United States, they always had this kind of, again, it was a socialized culture that African individuals were lesser beings, that they weren't human or they were subhuman. So that continues on through subsequent generations. And, you know, they were never allowed to buy them freedom. You had, what's his name? The Dred Scott ruling, where the individual was originally able to get free and go to the North, and then was not able to basically get his freedom properly because of the legal system. So you have these long-standing consequences of individuals having these beliefs and these perspectives, whereas in South America, they're not really there anymore. Obviously, there were still individuals who would see different races, and they didn't treat their slaves, because they were still slaves, as the best of people, but they had a different perspective on them. And so now, 400 years later, race isn't as big of an issue in South America as it is in North America, simply because of how the society's perspectives were aligned.
Right. Okay. I'm just trying to figure out like where because that's the basis of eugenics, right?
Mm-hmm. There's just the idea that, you know, there's an ideal race, there's a super race.
Right. Yeah. Like I find it so intriguing that like that whole idea we can fight when it comes to Hitler, but we embrace when it comes to everything else. So when it comes to picking a neighborhood, eugenics matter. When it comes to fighting a war, it doesn't.
And that's actually a divide. I guess you'd say it's a divide, or there's internal arguments within the sociological community about race, because race is a social construct. From a biological genetic point of view, we are all 99.9% the same. It is simply it's genetic frequencies. It's basically where your, you know, the selective genes for your ancestors, you know, it's evolution basically, why we have these very minimal differences that, you know, perpetuate themselves in physical ways. So to a lot of sociologists, race is a social construct, so they don't like to focus on race. So like,
hang on a second.
Yes, I know. I don't agree with it.
That's like taking out the hardest level. Like,
yeah. Well, they don't like the focus. So like, you know, part of it is the census, the U.S. Census. Well, you know, you have to put you are white, you are black. Hispanic is not a race as recognized by the U.S. Census. You're either Hispanic white or Hispanic black, which is a weird thing in its own right. Then you're Asian or Pacific Islander or American Indian. But like, okay, you're Asian. So this is where more people, I get their argument more. It's like, okay, you're Asian. It's like, well, are you Indian? Are you Japanese? Are you Thai? Like, there are very different cultures and even but that's how the census defines us. And a lot of the data that we'll use is either the General Sociological Survey or the U.S. Census, because that's the data we're given.
Wait a second. How often is the census updated?
Every 10 years.
Oh, hang on. What do you mean?
They do it more locally sometimes, but every 10 years is when they do the full national. So 2010 was the last time we did the full national survey of like trying to track down every individual in the United States.
Why so long in between census? Does it take that long to crunch the data?
Crunch the data and the man and woman power to basically, because they literally will make phone calls and they'll go door to door to try to track down like every individual.
Right, but if they're only doing it every 10 years, how many years does it take to actually gather everything?
I can't tell you. I don't know that offhand.
This is the thing I don't understand is why aren't there census bureaus in, like, I assume there's census bureaus in every state.
Mm-hmm.
So why not double down on, like, I feel like understanding this stuff and having the data to actually be able to govern and manage and handle problems and everything else like that is something we should actually be spending money on.
Well, there's probably two different arguments. One to it where it's like there's the individuals who I don't want to make generalizations or assumptions, but it tends to be people on the right who say, oh, they're always focusing on race and the minorities and this and that, and they want to be like, I want to focus on an individual's merit, which is a great statement, but the reality is that race has a large bearing on an individual's outcomes and circumstances in life.
Right, but the census covers way more than just race.
It covers income, it covers religion, it covers a lot of things.
Right.
But it also doesn't cover, like, you'll do things like, you know, we have, what was the number? Is it 6 million? I think there's 6 million individuals who identify as mixed race. Maybe it's higher than that in the United States. But that's you can say I identify as mixed race, but that's like, there's so many other factors to that. Like, you know, are you white, black? Are you white, Asian? Are you black, Asian? You know, like, there's just so many other factors to it that it's like, there's no analysis there. So
yeah, but I mean, you don't have the ability to like just basically set the color wheel and just have 20 different options and just check all that apply and just whatever, like, because whatever the data is, it doesn't change or hurt the data if one person checks 4 boxes. It just means that it just divides your data up into more realistic columns. Like, not having these separations, it either feels lazy or just downright belligerent that you just don't want to know the specifics, because the second you start to have, like, the second you learn, then you have to do something about it.
It's also it's the human nature to categorize everything, but at the same time, so this is where you start to go back to why the merits of anthropology and qualitative research. Like everybody's experience is different. So you talk about, like I said, there's no Hispanic race. You know, you are either white Hispanic or black Hispanic.
Wait, according to the census.
According to the census, right? But so,
for what the fuck does that even mean? By the way, what?
Well, and then there's like confusion because you also have people who will say Latinos versus Hispanics, and they don't know the difference. Latino means you're from Latin America. Right? Actually, now the proper PC term is Latinx. So Latino or Latina to cover both genders or non-binary genders. But so you have, if you are Latinx, you are from Latin America. If you are Hispanic, you are from a Spanish-speaking country.
Okay.
So if you are from Brazil, you're not Hispanic because Brazil is a Portuguese-speaking country. So you have those designations where it's like, okay, are they Latin or are they Hispanic? But then you also have, so the island of Hispaniola is half Haiti, half Dominican Republic.
Right.
Also had because of the French involvement. So the French basically owned Haiti. They sold them their independence, and they have been paying that debt off for 100 years, which is why Haiti is often economically disparaged versus the Dominican Republic. But you also have race difference there. So while both of those countries are Latin and Hispanic, you also tend to have more fairer-skinned individuals from the Dominican Republic and more darker-skinned individuals from Haiti. So even within the same island, you have these like white versus black designations. So like they're both Hispanic, but culturally and socially speaking, they are opposed to each other because of race differences too.
Okay, but you can't, like, I don't understand, because your statement I understand. Mm-hmm. I don't understand why you don't just put the fucking category on the piece of paper.
Because I think, at least with that, that's one of the times where they do have more designations. So say Hispanic white versus Hispanic black, because that gives you, like I said, like, you know, Haiti versus Dominican Republic. Whereas if you just said Hispanic, that covers a large swath of individuals. So that actually does, because there's an option to say, are you white, are you black? And then after that, you say, I'm also Hispanic. So when we do analysis, we'll say non-Hispanic whites versus Hispanic whites. So we are looking at Hispanic individuals, but then you have this question of passing. Passing, like, could they still look like fair-skinned? Are they not treated as immigrants or black individuals or whatever?
Okay.
So that's the one case where the census does have more minutia to it.
Then wouldn't it be better to classify people voluntarily by culture rather than skin color?
Yep, wholeheartedly. Like Indians, you know, the entire 1.2 billion people that live there are considered Asian, but it's like they are an entirely different culture. There's, I think, 33 different languages and dialects in the country of India. Like, it's a very vast. So it would be much more appropriate to say, you know, I'm Indian Asian American, or just say Indian. You know, you say Indian American as long as you clarify that you mean the country India, not the disparaged people that were the first people.
No, I like this. This is what I'm like. This is the thing. I feel like we can solve a lot of this with flow charts based on cultural understandings. Like the second, like I go to take the thing, and it's like, do you like Hall & Oates? Yes. Okay. I know you're white. We're fine. We can move on down the breakdown. Like there's probably a pretty easy way to handle all of this. Like I think that's maybe the thing. I don't understand why we couldn't do this 90% online.
Mm-hmm.
Why we couldn't just have all of the fucking demographics. Get a bazillion checkboxes. Who the fuck cares? Like, let's make it accurate. Let's do it every year. Let's make it voluntary. And the more, or fuck it, let's get a gift card back. Whatever we were paying the people to go out there, let's send everybody a $5 Amazon gift card in their email, and we just break the shit up. Hey, you did the census. You were hanging out watching TV. You spent half an hour. You did the census. Cool. Here's $5 towards your next purchase on Amazon or McDonald's or whatever the fuck it is. And we just make it that way and then get some real data. Then you can actually figure out where your issues are and then fucking tackle them.
The problem with that is you have individuals who maybe don't have the financial means to have internet access, like, you know, maybe they can get to a library or whatever, but transportation.
Sure, okay. We can definitely cut down on the amount of people. Like if I voluntarily did the census, right? Mm-hmm. And you know that my address is good. When you send out the census taker, you can send them out with a list of addresses that have not responded to the actual thing. Then they're not just going door to door. They're just checking off a list. Cool. All right. 7 Maple Street, it took care of it, and 14 Maple Street did as well, and we're going just down the street. Okay, I've got 5 houses on this block who didn't fill it out. I'm going to go knock on the door and see if I can get a hold of them. That definitely cuts down on the amount of time that a census taker is out into the field.
Right.
You can, if FedEx and UPS can figure out exactly how many left turns and how long their trucks are out in the field, you can figure out about how long it should take for most of these census people and get a realistic idea. I know it's not going to be perfect, but a realistic idea of how long it should take somebody, how many people we need, and what kind of data you're going to get from response.
You also have the other side of it where you have individuals who are afraid of the government, whether it's because they are undocumented immigrants,
they're not going to answer the door anyway.
Right.
So
or you have people who are like, keep your hands off my guns.
Right. But this is the thing. Whatever. Yeah. The whole thing is that if you want to try and reach out to a new generation and understand culture and the change and everything's going online. Why the fuck wouldn't you have, is the concern that Russia's going to break in and hack our census data? Fuck it. At least we'd get something, because we barely get any fucking census data now.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm not entirely familiar with the entire process, but I do know that they still go door to door, and they basically ask the demographic questions of, how many people are in this household, income, things like that. They also use some of the data from the IRS to kind of compute that data as well, which is why we can have running tallies. There's often census data that's kind of extrapolated for the in-between years. So we can still have census data from 2017 based on birth records and tax returns and things like that. But it's not necessarily the most thorough, because a lot of it might be extrapolating based on, new data, but not necessarily accurate data.
Yeah, I don't know.
They try, and I mean, it gives you enough of a ballpark idea to kind of look at things, because they also will track it with other things. So you can look at who's on welfare, who's on Social Security, and not necessarily individuals, but say how many people, what's the typical demographic of individuals on welfare, whether it's the SNAP, the supplemental nutritional, with the AAP.
No, I know what you're talking about.
And the data has shown that it's typically single mothers who are the people who are on SNAP.
Right.
Because imagine that. Being a single mother is a difficult thing to do.
Yeah, imagine when you have children to feed and you don't have the income to do so, and you have the ability to get a little bit of assistance, you're going to take the assistance.
But the narrative that the media and politicians often like to tout is that it's minorities, it's immigrants, it's these lazy poor people who are abusing the system, when all the data shows that's not true.
I'd like to see some of these fucking douchebags do some of the jobs that some of these quote unquote lazy people do, because fuck you. Okay. Let me be clear. I do a manual labor job, and nowhere near as difficult as some of these other jobs. I have no interest in, for example, being a roofer. I got no interest in being a roofer. I could do it. I'm physically capable of doing it. I got no fucking interest in hopping up on somebody else's roof in the middle of winter and fixing it because I need to make a buck. Fuck that. Yeah. So if someone else wants to do that job, and that someone happens to have a lower bit of education, but, doesn't come from the background or doesn't come from this country, I don't fucking care. Thank you, sir or ma'am, for all of your hard work willing to do the job that I don't want to do.
Well, let's say you had, you have, whether it's undocumented immigrants or you have people here on work visas, which actually has happened on the Eastern Shore here. You have individuals from Mexico and other countries that are here on work visas. And one of the big things that we do here in Maryland is the crab, not shuckers, because that's oysters, but the individuals who pick the crab meat out of crabs, our Maryland blue crabs that we love so much. A lot of them are documented immigrants who are only here for the summer for the work visas. And they, when they're talking about increasing restrictions on these individuals, that's going to affect local economies like Maryland. In Alabama and some of the Gulf states, they increased the restrictions and made it very difficult for undocumented immigrants to help on farms and other areas because they wanted to, they'll say, oh, these immigrants are stealing our jobs. Once they increase those restrictions, they had no employees because Americans don't want to work those jobs. No, Americans have established this expectation of life of, oh, this is what I want to do for a living. I want to either, whether it's light manual labor where I want to sit in an office, I want to sit at a desk, that's work. I'm working hard. It's like, no, you may be working mentally hard, but there's physical work that nobody wants to do that these individuals are willing to do. But no, we want to get them out of the country because they're stealing jobs.
Well, man. All right, we're going down a rabbit hole because I've got my own arguments and yeah. Okay, so let's jump back real quick because before we wrap this up, I have one question, which is why haven't you taken the first of many steps to become the Neil deGrasse Tyson of sociology?
I'm still working on what my focus would be because sociology is a very large field. What I'm working towards, what my master's thesis was on and what I want my doctorate thesis to be on is studying sociology of education. And one, how education differs for demographics, both how it affects them and how they affect education. So like one of the examples I want to study is you have the Nordic countries. You have Finland is one of the most high scoring on they do the global tests of math, reading, and other academic fields. Finland is one of the highest scoring countries, and so are Sweden and Norway. Their educational structure is very loose. It's very holistic. They have long recesses. It's very interactional. They pay for their teachers to go to college, but they also have very strict expectations for those teachers.
Right.
On the other side of it, China and other East Asian countries also perform very well on these global tests. They have very strict regiments. They're very rote memorizations. You have these literally after hours tutoring clubs in South Korea that they have to break up. These are these kids that are trying to get extra information because they want to study hard. It's this sense of duty and this sense of honor. They are past, and so the systems are concerned for the well-being of these students because they're studying too hard. But that's just the kind of social systems they've created over there. And the results show, they tend to perform much better than every other country on these tests as well. So you have two different sides of the spectrum, and clearly it's tied to cultural values, but they get the same results. So I want to kind of look at what is it about these particular aspects of their culture that influence these educational results.
I think it's got to be something to do with responsibility because Finland, you bring up something that I had taken an interest in, and it'll be a quick aside here. When they train kids to drive in Finland, they require them to do way more than just a regular driving test like you or I have to do. There's like a ton of defensive driving courses, and they take them out on a skid pad, and they do a ton of other sort of guided stuff. And they also encourage motorsport where they encourage kids to be able to drive. Because of this, and I know it's a microcosm, Finland's responsible for more professional winning rally drivers than anything else. And it's the joke of want to win, get a Finn. And it's the culture that drives the capability that then drives this stealing nerve ability to drive in the woods at high speed, in precision, and make a lot of money doing it. And I wonder if, when it comes to education, whether it's, in Finland or in China or anywhere else that gets great results, it's the structure of the culture where they're like, no, you have to do the thing to get the thing. There's no easy way out. There's no ability to take the fast track. There's no lottery to do the thing. There's no YouTube star to jump ahead and suddenly become the thing. You gotta fucking put the work in.
Right.
There seems to be a very clear Michael Jordan level 10,000 hours that you gotta fucking hit to make that bar that seems to be just the line that goes across the board that I wonder is maybe the real thing. They put the fucking work in.
It could be. So my thesis was on the academic achievement of first and second generation immigrants, which is a topic, it was clearly a selfish topic because it's personal because I'm a second generation immigrant. My mom immigrated to this country in 1971, my dad around the same time. So while I was born here, my parents were both immigrants from Thailand. And based on anecdotes and just my own personal interactions, it seemed to me that a lot of the second generation immigrants I knew either did as well or did more in terms of degrees than their parents. So when I started doing my thesis, I wanted to study this. So I looked at different cultures and different demographics within the United States, and I looked at the educational attainment of first generation immigrants compared with second. And across the board, there tends to be a rise. So, which it almost seems logical that, like, okay, you want the kids to do better. And unfortunately, since this is looking at strictly immigrants, I can't compare entirely to native born. But it seems to me it's not just parents doing well, so the kids do well. It's that because they're second generation immigrants, and that mentality of my parents traveled X thousand number of miles to this country for the American opportunity, that they, they worked their asses off. So it's the same thing. Or it's like, I have to put the work in, because there's even data that shows within the same ethnic groups. So it's not just, oh, Asians do better, Indians do better, whoever does better. It's within the same ethnic group, generational immigrants perform better than native born immigrants from the same ethnic group. Did I lose you? I can't hear you. All right.